Welcome to the I Can't Sleep podcast, where I help you drift off one fact at a time. I'm your host, Benjamin Boster, and today's episode is about daylight savings time. Daylight saving time, also referred to as daylight savings time, daylight time, United States and Canada, or summertime, United Kingdom, European Union, and others, is a practice of advancing clocks to make better use of the longer daylight available during summer so that darkness falls at a later clock time. The standard implementation of DST is to set clocks forward by 1 hour in spring or late winter, and to set clocks back by 1 hour to standard time in the autumn, or fall in North American English, hence the mnemonic spring forward and fall back. In several countries, the number of weeks when DST is observed is much longer than the number devoted to standard time. As of 2023, around 34% of the world's countries use DST, primarily in Europe and North America. Some countries observe it only in some regions. In Canada, all of Yukon, most of Saskatchewan, and parts of Nunavut, Ontario, British Columbia, and Quebec do not change clocks and use permanent DST. It is observed by 4 Australian states and 1 territory. In the United States, it is observed by all states except Hawaii and Arizona. Within the latter, however, the Navajo Nation does observe it. Historically, several ancient societies adopted several changes to their timekeeping to make better use of daylight. Roman timekeeping even included changes to water clocks to accommodate this. However, these were changes to the time divisions of the day rather than setting the whole clock forward. In a satirical letter to the editor of the Journal de Paris in 1784, Benjamin Franklin suggested that if Parisians could only wake up earlier in the summer, they would economize on candle and oil usage. But he did not propose changing the clocks. In 1895, New Zealand entomologist and astronomer George Hudson made the first realistic proposal to change clocks by 2 hours every spring to the Wellington Philosophical Society. But this was not implemented until 1928 and in another form. In 1907, William Willett proposed the adoption of British summertime as a way to save energy. Although seriously considered by Parliament, it was not implemented until 1916. The first implementation of DST was by Port Arthur, today merged into Thunder Bay in Ontario, Canada, in 1908, but only locally, not nationally. The first nationwide implementations were by the German and Austro-Hungarian empires, both starting on the 30th of April 1916. Since then, many countries have adopted DST at various times, particularly since the 1970s energy crisis. Industrialized societies usually follow a clock-based schedule for daily activities that do not change throughout the course of the year. The time of day that individuals begin and end work or school, and the coordination of mass transit, for example, usually remain constant year-round. In contrast, in agrarian societies, daily routines for work and personal conduct are more likely governed by the length of daylight hours and by solar time, which change seasonally because of the Earth's axial tilt. North and south of the tropics, daylight lasts longer in that hemisphere's summer and is shorter in that hemisphere's winter, with the effect becoming greater the farther one moves away from the equator. DST is of little use for locations near the equator, because these regions see only a small variation in daylight over the course of the year. After synchronously resetting the clocks in a region to 1 hour ahead of standard time in spring in anticipation of longer daylight hours, individuals following a clock-based schedule will be awakened an hour earlier in the solar day than they would have been otherwise. They will begin and complete daily work routines an hour earlier. In most cases, they will have an extra hour of daylight available to them after their workday activities. The clock shift is partially motivated by practicality. At the summer solstice in American temperate latitudes, for example, the sun rises around 0430 Standard Time and sets around 1930. Since most people are asleep at 0430, it is seen as practical to treat 0430 as if it were 0530, whereby allowing people to wake closer to sunrise and be active in the evening light, as the sun under DST sets an hour later, 2030. Proponents of daylight saving time argue that most people prefer more daylight hours after the typical 9-to-5 workday. Supporters have also argued that DST decreases energy consumption by reducing the need for lighting and heating, but the actual effect on overall energy use is heavily disputed. For evaluation, it is required to go beyond considering only energy demand for lighting and also consider the energy used for heating or cooling buildings. The effect of daylight saving time also varies according to how far east or west the location is within its time zone, with locations farther east inside the time zone benefiting more from DST than locations farther west in the same time zone. Ancient civilizations adjusted daily schedules to the sun more flexibly than DST does, often dividing daylight into 12 hours regardless of daytime, so that each daylight hour became progressively longer during spring and shorter during autumn. For example, the Romans kept time with water clocks that had different scales for different months of the year. At Rome's latitude, the third hour from sunrise, or tertia, started at 9:02 solar time and lasted 44 minutes at the winter solstice. But at the summer solstice, it started at 6:58 and lasted 75 minutes. From the 14th century onward, equal-length civil hours supplanted unequal ones, so civil time no longer varied by season. Unequal hours are still used in a few traditional settings, such as monasteries of Mount Athos and in Jewish ceremonies. Benjamin Franklin published the proverb, "Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise," and published a letter in the Journal de Paris when he was an American envoy to France, 1776 to 1785, suggesting that Parisians economize on candles by rising earlier to use morning sunlight. This 1784 satire proposed taxing window shutters, rationing candles, and waking the public by ringing church bells and firing cannons at sunrise. Despite common misconception, Franklin did not actually propose DST. 18th century Europe did not even keep precise schedules. However, this changed as rail transport and communication networks required a standardization of clocks unknown in Franklin's day. In 1810, the Spanish National Assembly, Cortes of Cádiz, issued a regulation that moved certain meeting times forward by 1 hour, from the 1st of May to the 30th of September, in recognition of seasonal changes, but it did not change the clocks. It also acknowledged that private businesses were in the practice of changing their opening hours to suit daylight conditions, but they did so of their volition. New Zealand entomologist George Hudson first proposed modern DST. His shift work job gave him spare time to collect insects and led him to value after-hours daylight. In 1895, he presented a paper to the Wellington Philosophical Society, proposing a 2-hour daylight saving shift, and considerable interest was expressed in Christchurch. He followed up with an 1898 paper. Many publications credit the DST proposal to prominent English builder and outdoorsman William Willett, who independently conceived DST in 1907 during a pre-breakfast ride when he observed how many Londoners slept through a large part of a summer day. Willett also was an avid golfer who disliked cutting short his round at dusk. His solution was to advance the clock during the summer, and he published the proposal 2 years later. Liberal Party Member of Parliament Robert Pearce took up the proposal, introducing the first daylight saving bill to the British House of Commons on the 12th of February 1908. A select committee was set up to examine the issue, but Pearce's bill did not become law, and several other bills failed in the following years. Willett lobbied for the proposal in the UK until his death in 1915. Port Arthur, Ontario, Canada, was the first city in the world to enact DST on the 1st of July, 1908. This was followed by Orillia, Ontario, introduced by William Sword Frost while mayor from 1911 to 1912. The first states to adopt DST nationally were those of the German Empire and its World War I ally, Austria-Hungary, commencing on the 30th of April 1916, as a way to conserve coal during wartime. Britain, most of its allies, and many European neutrals soon followed. Russia and a few other countries waited until the next year, and the United States adopted daylight saving in 1918. Most jurisdictions abandoned DST in the years after the war ended in 1918, with exceptions including Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Ireland, and the United States. It became common during World War II and was standardized in the U.S. by federal law in 1966, and widely adopted in Europe from the 1970s as a result of the 1970s energy crisis. Since then, the world has seen many enactments, adjustments, and repeals. It is a common myth in the United States that DST was first implemented for the benefit of farmers. In reality, farmers have been one of the strongest lobbying groups against DST since it was first implemented. The factors that influence farming schedules, such as morning dew and dairy cattle's readiness to be milked, are ultimately dictated by the sun, so the clock change introduces unnecessary challenges. DST was first implemented in the U.S. with the Standard Time Act of 1918, a wartime measure for 7 months during World War I in the interest of adding more daylight hours to conserve energy resources. Year-round DST, or wartime, was implemented again during World War II. After the war, local jurisdictions were free to choose if and when to observe DST until the Uniform Time Act, which standardized DST in 1966. Permanent daylight savings time was enacted for the winter of 1974, but there were complaints of children going to school in the dark, and working people commuting and starting their workday in pitch darkness during the winter and it was repealed a year later. Specific times of the clock change vary by jurisdiction. The relevant authorities typically schedule clock changes to occur at or soon after midnight and on a weekend in order to lessen disruption to weekday schedules. A 1-hour change is usual, but 20-minute and 2-hour changes have been used in the past. Notable exceptions today include Lord Howe Island, with a 30-minute change, and Troll Research Station that shifts 2 hours directly between CEST and GMT since 2016. In all countries that observe daylight saving time seasonally, i.e. during summer and not winter, the clock is advanced from standard time to daylight saving time in the spring, and it is turned back from daylight saving time to standard time in the autumn. For a midnight change in spring, a digital display of local time would appear to jump from 23:59:59.9 to 1.000. For the same clock in autumn, the local time would appear to repeat the hour preceding midnight, i.e., it would jump from 23:59:59.9 to 23.000. In most countries that observe seasonal daylight saving time, clocks revert in winter to standard time. An exception exists in Ireland where its winter clock has the same offset and legal name as that in Britain. But while its summer clock also has the same offset as Britain's, its legal name is confusingly called Irish Standard Time, as opposed to British Summer Time. Since 2019, Morocco observes daylight saving time every month but Ramadan. During the holy month, the date of which is determined by the lunar calendar, and thus moves annually with regard to the Gregorian calendar, the country's civil clocks observe Western European time. At the close of that month, its clocks are turned forward to Western European summertime. The time at which to change clocks differs across jurisdictions. Members of the European Union conduct a coordinated change, changing all zones at the same instant at 0100 Coordinated Universal Time, UTC, which means that it changes at 0200 Central European Time, CET, equivalent to 0300 Eastern European Time, EET. As a result, the time differences across European time zones remain constant. North America coordination of the clock change differs in that each jurisdiction changes at each local clock's 0200, which temporarily creates an imbalance with the next time zone until it adjusts its clock 1 hour later at 2 a.m. there. For example, Mountain Time is for 1 hour in the spring, 2 hours ahead of Pacific Time, instead of the usual 1 hour ahead, and instead of 1 hour in the autumn, briefly 0 hours ahead of Pacific Time. The dates on which clocks change vary with location and year. Consequently, the time differences between regions also vary throughout the year. For example, Paris, which uses Central European Time, is usually 6 hours ahead of New York City, which uses North American Eastern Time, except for a few weeks in March and October and November, when it is 5 hours ahead. Paris and Santiago are 6 hours apart during the northern summer, 4 hours during the southern summer, and 5 hours for a few weeks per year. Since 1996, European summertime has been observed from the last Sunday in March to the last Sunday in October. Previously, the rules were not uniform across the European Union. Starting in 2007, Most of the United States and Canada observe DST from the second Sunday in March to the first Sunday in November, almost 2/3 of the year. Moreover, the beginning and ending dates are roughly reversed between the northern and southern hemispheres, because spring and autumn are displaced 6 months. For example, mainland Chile observes DST from the second Saturday in October to the second Saturday in March, with transitions at the local clock's 2400. In some countries, clocks are governed by regional jurisdictions within the country, such that some jurisdictions change and others do not. This is currently the case in Australia, Canada, and the United States. From year to year, the dates on which to change clocks may also move for political or social reasons. The Uniform Time Act of 1966 formalized the United States period of daylight saving time observation as lasting 6 months. It was previously declared locally. This period was extended to 7 months in 1986 and then to 8 months in 2005. The 2005 extension was motivated in part by lobbyists from the candy industry seeking to increase profits by including Halloween within the daylight saving time period. In recent history, Australian state jurisdictions not only changed at different local times, but sometimes on different dates. For example, in 2008, most states there that observed daylight saving time changed clocks forward on the 5th of October, but Western Australia changed on the 26th of October. The concept of daylight saving has caused controversy since its early proposals. Winston Churchill argued that it enlarges the opportunities for the pursuit of health and happiness among the millions of people who live in this country, and pundits have dubbed it daylight saving time. Retailing, sports, and tourism interests have historically favored daylight saving, while agricultural and evening entertainment interests and some religious groups have opposed it. Energy crises and war prompted its initial adoption. Willett's 1907 proposal illustrates several political issues. It attracted many supporters, including Arthur Balfour, Churchill, David Lloyd George, Ramsay MacDonald, King Edward VII, who used half-hour daylight saving time, or Sandringham time at Sandringham, the managing director of Harrods, and the manager of the National Bank Limited. However, the opposition proved stronger, including Prime Minister H. H. Asquith, William Christie, the Astronomer Royal, George Darwin, Napier Shaw, director of the Meteorological Office, many agricultural organizations, and theater owners. After many hearings, a parliamentary committee vote narrowly rejected the proposal in 1909. Willett's allies introduced similar bills every year from 1911 through 1914 to no avail. People in the U.S. demonstrated even more skepticism. Andrew Peters introduced a DST bill to the House of Representatives in May 1909, but it soon died in committee. Germany and its allies led the way in introducing DST during World War I on the 30th of April 1916, aiming to alleviate hardships due to wartime coal shortages and air raid blackouts. The political equation changed in other countries. The United Kingdom used DST first on the 21st of May 1916. U.S. retailing and manufacturing interests, led by Pittsburgh industrialist Robert Garland, soon began lobbying for DST, but railroads opposed the idea. The U.S.'s 1917 entry into the war overcame objections, and DST started in 1918. The end of World War I brought a change in DST use. Farmers continued to dislike DST, and many countries repealed it, like Germany itself, which dropped DST from 1919 to 1939 and from 1950 to 1979. Britain proved an exception. It retained DST nationwide, but adjusted transition dates over the years for several reasons, including special rules during the 1920s and 1930s to avoid clock shifts on Easter mornings. As of 2009, summertime began annually on the last Sunday in March under a European Community Directive, which may be Easter Sunday, as in 2016. In the U.S., Congress repealed DST after 1919. President Woodrow Wilson, an avid golfer like Willett, vetoed the repeal twice, but his second veto was overridden. Only a few U.S. cities retained DST locally, including New York, so that its financial exchanges could maintain an hour of arbitrage trading with London, and Chicago and Cleveland to keep pace with New York. Wilson's successor as president, Warren G. Harding, opposed DST as a deception, reasoning that people should instead get up and go to work earlier in the summer. He ordered District of Columbia federal employees to start work at 8 a.m. rather than 9 a.m. during the summer of 1922. Some businesses followed suit, though many others did not. The experiment was not repeated. Since Germany's adoption of DST in 1916, the world has seen many enactments, adjustments, and repeals of DST, with similar politics involved. The history of time in the United States features DST during both World Wars, but no standardization of peacetime DST until 1966. St. Paul and Minneapolis, Minnesota, kept different clocks for 2 weeks in May 1965. The capital city decided to switch to daylight saving time, while Minneapolis opted to follow the later date set by state law. In the mid-1980s, Clorox and 7-Eleven provided the primary funding for the Daylight Saving Time Coalition behind the 1987 extension to U.S. DST. Both senators from Idaho, Larry Craig and Mike Crapo, voted for it based on the premise that fast food restaurants sell more French fries made from Idaho potatoes during DST. A referendum on the introduction of daylight saving took place in Queensland, Australia in 1992, after a 3-year trial of daylight saving. It was defeated with a 54.5% no vote, with regional and rural areas strongly opposed, and those in the metropolitan southeast in favor. In 2003, the United Kingdom's Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents supported a proposal to observe year-round daylight saving time, but it has been opposed by some industries, by some postal workers and farmers, and particularly by those living in the northern regions of the UK. In 2005, the Sporting Goods Manufacturers Association and the National Association of Convenience Stores successfully lobbied for the 2007 extension to US DST. In December 2008, the Daylight Saving for Southeast Queensland political party was officially registered in Queensland, advocating for the implementation of a dual time zone arrangement for daylight saving in southeast Queensland, while the rest of the state maintains standard time. DS4SEQ contested the March 2009 Queensland state election with 32 candidates and received 1% of the statewide primary vote, equating to around 2.5% across the 32 electorates contested. After a 3-year trial, more than 55% of Western Australians voted against DST in 2009, with rural areas strongly opposed. Queensland Independent member Peter Wellington introduced the Daylight Saving for South East Queensland Referendum Bill 2010 into the Queensland Parliament on the 14th of April 2010, after being approached by the DS4-SEQ political party, calling for a referendum at the next state election on the introduction of daylight saving into southeast Queensland under a dual time zone arrangement. The Queensland Parliament rejected Wellington's bill on the 15th of June 2011. Russia declared in 2011 that it would stay in DST all year long, and Belarus followed with a similar declaration. The Soviet Union had operated in a permanent summertime from 1930 to at least 1982. Russia's plan generated widespread complaints due to the dark of wintertime mornings, and thus was abandoned in 2014. The country changed its clocks to standard time on the 26th of October 2014, intending to stay there permanently. In the United States, Arizona, with the exception of the Navajo Nation, Hawaii, and the 5 populated territories, American Samoa, Guam, Puerto Rico, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, do not participate in daylight saving time. Indiana only began participating in daylight saving time as recently as 2006. Between 2018 and 2024, former Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio repeatedly filed bills to extend daylight saving time permanently into winter without success. Mexico observed summertime daylight saving time starting in 1996. In late 2022, the nation's blocks fell back for the last time in restoration of permanent standard time. Proponents of DST generally argue that it saves energy, promotes outdoor leisure activity in the evening and summer, and is therefore good for physical and psychological health, reduces traffic accidents, reduces crime, or is good for business. Opponents argue that actual energy savings are inconclusive. Although energy conservation goals still remain under certain conditions, energy usage patterns have greatly changed since then. In a publication from 2025 based on this change in consumption patterns, such as air conditioning systems, additional consumption is expected to occur more frequently during daylight saving time in the future. Electricity use is greatly affected by geography, climate, and economics, so the results of a study conducted in one place may not be relevant to another country or climate. Nevertheless, while overall electricity usage does not decrease, the evening peak demand is flattened, which in turn has a direct impact on generation costs. A 2017 meta-analysis of 44 studies found that DST leads to electricity savings of 0.3% during the days when DST applies. Several studies have suggested that DST increases motor fuel consumption, but a 2008 United States Department of Energy report found no significant increase in motor gasoline consumption due to the 2007 United States extension of DST. An early goal of DST was to reduce evening usage of incandescent lighting, once a primary use of electricity.